Her hand struck my face so hard, I tasted blood. And then she screamed, "You're dead weight in our lives. Go live in the dump." My knees buckled, not because of the pain, but because my own son just stood there, watching, saying nothing. I had raised him through storms, sickness, and nights when there was nothing on the table but hope. I thought I had a place in his heart that no one could erase. But standing in that kitchen, with my cheek burning and my dignity crumbling, I realized I was wrong. For 68 years, I believed family meant safety, but that day, family became the very thing I needed safety from. This is my story. I'm Katherine, and today, you'll hear what happened after the slap that ended my life as I knew it. Welcome to Katherine Stories, where every story is real, raw, and full of heart. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It's more than curiosity. Your comment helps this story find others who need to hear it. Let's begin. It started small. Little jabs from my daughter-in-law, Hannah. That sweater looks old-fashioned. Maybe you should write things down so you don't forget. She'd smile while saying it, but the smile never reached her eyes. It was the kind of smile people give when they're not really smiling, just stretching their lips into the shape of one so they can pretend their words are harmless. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself, she's young. She doesn't understand yet. After all, I was living in their home. My son, David, had insisted after Peter, my husband, passed away. "Mom, we have plenty of space. You shouldn't be alone," he'd said one evening, his voice warm, almost pleading. I remember looking at him across the kitchen table, the same table Peter and I had bought together in the early years of our marriage, and thinking, at least I still have him. The first few weeks in their house felt like a blessing. Lily, my granddaughter, would run into my room every morning, climb onto my bed, and chatter about school, friends, and the new books she was reading. Hannah had been polite, even offering to help me unpack my boxes. I told myself that living with them would be a chance to bond, to be part of their daily lives. But somewhere along the line, I stopped feeling like family and started feeling like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. It began with the pantry. One day, I went to grab some sugar to bake cookies for Lily. The pantry door was locked. I thought maybe Lily had been playing with it, but later that evening, I saw Hannah slip a small key into her apron pocket. "I didn't want Lily snacking before dinner," she said when she caught me looking. But the look she gave me said more than her words, a sharp, territorial glance, as though I'd overstepped. Then came the furniture. One afternoon, while I was in the garden pruning roses, I came inside to find the living room rearranged. My favorite chair, the one I'd placed by the window so I could watch the sunset, was shoved into a corner facing the wall. "I thought the space would flow better this way," Hannah said casually, "more modern." When I tried to move it back later, she clicked her tongue and muttered, "I just changed it." And then there were the sighs. Long, heavy sighs at the dinner table whenever I asked a question, as though my voice was an inconvenience, my curiosity a chore. Through all of it, David stayed silent. That silence hurt more than the words. When you've raised someone, when you've been there for every scraped knee, every late-night fever, every broken teenage heart, you don't expect their silence to become the loudest answer of all. I told myself he was caught in the middle, that he didn't want to upset his wife. But at night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if he had started seeing me the way Hannah did, as someone who no longer fit neatly into his life. The tension became a quiet, constant hum in the house. Every interaction felt like a negotiation. Every movement felt observed, measured, and judged. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when Hannah walked in. She didn't say hello. Instead, she picked up one of my blouses from the basket, held it between two fingers, and said, "You know, they make wrinkle-free fabrics these days. You wouldn't have to iron so much." I smiled faintly and kept folding, but inside, a little thread of dignity unraveled. Another time, Lily came home from school with a drawing she'd made. She ran straight to me. "It's us, Grandma. See? We're in the garden," she said, her eyes sparkling. I hugged her and told her I loved it. But before I could hang it on the fridge, Hannah plucked it from my hands and said, "Let's keep the fridge for school to hangs, okay? This one can go in your room, Mom." Her mom wasn't warm. It was sharp, like a reminder that the kitchen, the fridge, the house weren't mine. Then came the whispers. Late at night, I'd hear their voices in the living room. I never meant to eavesdrop, but when you live in a house where you feel unwanted, your ears naturally tune to the conversations you're not meant to hear. "She's always here, David," Hannah said one night, her voice tight, like a string pulled too far. "She's in the kitchen when I'm cooking, in the living room when I want to relax. I feel like I can't breathe." "She's my mother," David replied, but his voice wasn't strong. It was tired, defeated. The pause that followed was long enough to tell me everything, that my presence had become a problem, that my son, the boy I had carried, fed and fought for, was weary of me. I lay in bed staring into the dark, feeling the words sink into my bones. "She's suffocating us." The changes became more obvious after that. Meals started happening without me. I'd come downstairs to find the table already cleared, crumbs the only sign anyone had eaten. When I tried to join them in the evenings, Hannah would say, "Oh, we're just about to watch a movie you probably wouldn't like." The unspoken message was clear. "You're not part of this moment." Even Lily began to pull away, not because she wanted to, but because children notice the unspoken rules in a house faster than anyone. She stopped running into my room in the mornings. Her hugs became quick, distracted. One day she asked, "Grandma, are you going to live here forever?" Her tone wasn't mean. It was innocent, curious, but it was another thread pulling loose inside me. Then there were the mistakes Hannah never let me forget. One afternoon, I accidentally used the wrong setting on the washing machine and shrank one of David's sweaters. I apologized immediately, offering to replace it, but she sighed and said, "Maybe you shouldn't do the laundry anymore. It's too complicated." Another time, I left the back door unlocked after taking out the trash. She found it later and said, "If you can't remember little things like that, maybe we should think about alternatives." Alternatives. The word sat heavy in the air between us. But perhaps the most painful moment came during Lily's birthday. I'd spent the morning baking her favorite chocolate cake, frosting it with pink icing and decorating it with little sugar flowers. I was in the middle of setting it on the dining table when Hannah came in. "Oh, I already ordered a cake from the bakery," she said, her tone brisk. "We'll use that one instead. Yours can stay in the fridge." When Lily saw the bakery cake, she smiled politely, but I noticed her eyes flicker toward mine, confused, maybe even a little hurt on my behalf. That night, after everyone went to bed, I ate a slice of my cake alone in the kitchen. It tasted like sugar and grief. By now, my world inside that house had shrunk to 3 places: my bedroom, the garden, and the small corner of the living room where I kept my knitting. I moved quietly, tried not to be in the way, and kept reminding myself, "You're here because David wanted you here. You're here because you're family." But each day, that truth felt less certain. One evening, I decided to make a special dinner: roast chicken, garlic potatoes, green beans, and a peach cobbler for dessert. It was a meal Peter used to love, and I wanted to bring some warmth back into the house. While I was peeling potatoes, Hannah walked in, glanced at the counter, and said, "Oh, I already told David we'd order in tonight." She didn't offer to help put things away. She didn't ask if I'd already started. She just left, pulling her phone out to call the restaurant. I stood there with the potato peeler in my hand, the trash can open, and a lump in my throat so thick I could barely swallow. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the hallway clock, and my own heartbeat, heavy, steady, and filled with something I didn't want to name: the truth. The truth that my presence in their home was no longer an act of love, but an act of tolerance, and tolerance can run out. One evening, as I walked past the living room, I heard Hannah's voice again. "She's always here, David. She's suffocating us," she said, each word slow and deliberate as if rehearsed. "She's my mother," David replied. But this time there was no conviction, just exhaustion. The silence that followed was long, and in it, I heard something worse than anger. I heard agreement. That night, I couldn't sleep. My heart kept whispering the same truth over and over. They want you gone. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, a perfectly ordinary, quiet day, the kind you think will just pass without incident. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, warming the tiled floor. I had spent the morning dusting the shelves, watering the garden, and thinking about what treat I could make for Lily when she got home from school. She'd been looking tired lately, perhaps the long school days, or maybe just the energy in the house. So I decided on cookies. Chocolate chip, the kind that melt in your mouth when they're still warm, the kind Peter used to sneak while they were cooling on the rack. I tied my apron, pulled out the flour, sugar, and eggs, and began humming an old tune. For the first time in days, I felt a little spark of joy. By the time the dough was mixed, the kitchen smelled like comfort, sweet and familiar. I placed the first tray in the oven and began rolling the next batch when I heard the front door open. It was too early for David. I assumed Lily might have been dropped off sooner than usual, but instead, Hannah's heels clicked sharply again. It's in the floorboards. She walked into the kitchen, her expression already tight. Her eyes went straight to the counter, to the bag of flour, the small dusting of white on the tiles, the mixing bowls stacked by the sink. Without even removing her coat, she slammed her handbag down on the counter with a thud that made the flour puff into the air. "I told you not to make a mess in my kitchen," she snapped. Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the air. It startled me, not because she was loud, but because there was no build-up, no conversation, just pure, immediate anger. "It's just flour, Hannah. I'll clean," I began, wiping my hands on the apron. But before the sentence could leave my lips, she closed the gap between us. And then, her hand struck my face. The sound came first, a sharp, flat crack that seemed to echo in my ears. Then came the heat. A burning sting bloomed across my cheek, spreading like wildfire beneath my skin. My glasses tilted sideways, and for a moment the kitchen spun out of focus. I tasted metal, blood. My hand instinctively flew to my face, my fingertips pressing against the throbbing skin. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of losing control. It was deliberate. The sound of footsteps broke the silence. David walked in, holding his phone. He froze in the doorway, his eyes moving from Hannah to me, then back again. I waited for his face to change, for the shock to settle into anger, for him to step forward and demand to know what had just happened. But he didn't. His expression was unreadable. "She's dead weight in our lives," Hannah said suddenly, her voice loud and trembling with fury. She pointed at me like I was some unwanted object in the room. "Go live in the dump if you want to play ouse. Not here." The words hit harder than her hand. Dead weight. The woman who had carried his life inside her for 9 months was now a burden. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. A perfectly ordinary, quiet day, the kind you think will just pass without incident. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, warming the tiled floor. I had spent the morning dusting the shelves, watering the garden, and thinking about what treat I could make for Lily when she got home from school. She'd been looking tired lately, perhaps the long school days, or maybe just the energy in the house. So I decided on cookies, chocolate chip, the kind that melt in your mouth when they're still warm, the kind Peter used to sneak while they were cooling on the rack. I tied my apron, pulled out the flour, sugar, and eggs, and began humming an old tune. For the first time in days, I felt a little spark of joy. By the time the dough was mixed, the kitchen smelled like comfort, sweet and familiar. I placed the first tray in the oven and began rolling the next batch when I heard the front door open. It was too early for David. I assumed Lily might have been dropped off sooner than usual. But instead, Hannah's heels clicked sharply against the floorboards. She walked into the kitchen, her expression already tight. Her eyes went straight to the counter, to the bag of flour, the small dusting of white on the tiles, the mixing bowls stacked by the sink. Without even removing her coat, she slammed her handbag down on the counter with a thud that made the flour puff into the air. "I told you not to make a mess in my kitchen," she snapped. Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the air. It startled me, not because she was loud, but because there was no build-up, no conversation, just pure, immediate anger. "It's just flour, Hannah. I'll clean—" I began, wiping my hands on the apron. But before the sentence could leave my lips, she closed the gap between us, and then her hand struck my face. The sound came first, a sharp, flat crack that seemed to echo in my ears. Then came the heat. A burning sting bloomed across my cheek, spreading like wildfire beneath my skin. My glasses tilted sideways, and for a moment the kitchen spun out of focus. I tasted metal, blood. My hand instinctively flew to my face, my fingertips pressing against the throbbing skin. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of losing control. It was deliberate. The sound of footsteps broke the silence. David walked in, holding his phone. He froze in the doorway, his eyes moving from Hannah to me, then back again. I waited for his face to change, for the shock to settle into anger, for him to step forward and demand to know what had just happened. But he didn't. His expression was unreadable. "She's dead weight in our lives," Hannah said suddenly, her voice loud and trembling with fury. She pointed at me like I was some unwanted object in the room. "Go live in the dump if you want to play house. Not here." The words hit harder than her hand. Dead weight. The woman who had carried his life inside her for 9 months was now a burden. I turned to David, silently begging him with my eyes. "Say something. Defend me. Tell her that's not true." But he didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. And in that moment, I understood that the son I raised, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, the teenager who cried on my shoulder when his first love broke his heart, the man who once told me he couldn't imagine life without me, was gone. It's strange how quickly your body reacts to heartbreak. My legs felt weak, as though the bones inside them had turned to dust. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I might be sick. And my chest felt like it had been cracked open, the air rushing out of me in short, painful bursts. I wasn't crying, not yet. The tears were there, heavy and hot behind my eyes, but something deeper kept them from falling. Maybe pride, maybe shock. "David?" I whispered. My voice sounded foreign to me, small, almost fragile. Nothing. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just existed in that moment, frozen between his wife and his mother, and chose silence. In that pause, those few stretched-out seconds where no one spoke, something inside me broke. It wasn't just my trust. It wasn't just my love for them. It was the invisible thread that ties a mother to her child. The kind of bond you think can't be severed because it's been there since the first heartbeat you heard in a doctor's office. But that day, I felt the thread snap. I stepped back, my hand still pressed to my cheek. The room felt colder, the air heavier. "You don't have to worry," I said finally. My voice was steady, but I could hear the hollowness in it. "I won't be in your way much longer." I looked at David one last time. I don't know what I expected to see. Regret, fear, even shame. But all I saw was relief that the moment was ending. I turned and walked down the hallway to my room. My steps were slow, deliberate. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock. Once inside, I closed the door and leaned against it, finally letting the tears fall. They came in waves, shaking my entire body. I pressed my face into my hands and felt the sting again, the warmth of the skin where she'd struck me, but the ache in my cheek was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. From the other side of the door, I could hear muffled voices. Not once did I hear my name. Not once did I hear my son defend me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small pile of books on the nightstand, the ones Peter and I used to read together before bed. I reached for one, running my fingers over the worn cover, and I thought about him. What would he say if he could see this? What would he do if he saw the way his son had turned away from his mother? The thought was unbearable. Outside, the day continued as if nothing had happened. The oven timer beeped in the kitchen, signaling that the cookies were done. No one came to tell me. The smell drifted down the hall, warm, sweet, inviting, and for a moment I almost laughed at the cruel irony. Those cookies baked with love would likely never be eaten by the little girl I made them for. I stayed in my room for the rest of the afternoon. I heard the front door open again, Lily's voice, bright and innocent, filling the hallway. I wanted to step out, to hug her, to tell her there were cookies waiting, but I stayed seated on the bed, my hands folded tightly in my lap, because the truth was, I couldn't face her. Not with my cheeks still red, not with my heart still cracked wide open. Dinner came and went without me. No knock on my door, no plate left outside. It was clear now. Whatever I had been to them when I moved in, I wasn't that anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about every small thing that had led to this. The locked pantry, the rearranged furniture, the sighs at the dinner table, the whispered conversations when they thought I was asleep. Every piece clicked into place, forming a picture I hadn't wanted to see before. This wasn't sudden. It had been building for months. The slap wasn't the start, it was the conclusion. The moment they stopped pretending. Some people imagine a breaking point as a loud, fiery confrontation, but mine was quiet after the noise. The slap was just the spark. The real breaking point was the stillness afterward, the choice my son made to look away. Because sometimes, silence isn't neutral. Sometimes, silence takes a side. And that day, it wasn't mine. That night, after the slap, after the shouting, after the silence that spoke louder than anything, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I didn't rush to pack. I didn't storm out in anger. I simply let the decision settle inside me like a stone sinking in water. This was no longer my home. It hadn't been for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to see it. When the house went quiet, I pulled out the small suitcase from under the bed, the one I had used when I first moved in with them. I began folding clothes slowly, choosing only what I needed. A few blouses, 2 cardigans, 1 pair of good shoes. I left behind the rest, not because I didn't want them, but because I didn't want to carry the weight of that house with me. As I zipped the bag, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for what I was losing. Relief that I was choosing myself this time. I didn't cry in front of them. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. When I stepped into the hallway, I could see the faint light of the television flickering from the living room. David's silhouette was there, head tilted toward the screen, not toward me. Hannah was curled on the other end of the couch. Neither looked up. I stood there for a moment, memorizing the scene, not because it was precious, but because I knew it would be the last image I carried of this chapter in my life. I quietly opened the front door and stepped outside. The night air was crisp, almost too gentle for the storm still raging inside me. The sky was clear, sprinkled with stars, as if the universe was reminding me how vast life was beyond that house. I walked down the street toward the bus stop, my suitcase rolling behind me. With every step, I felt the invisible cord between me and that home stretch thinner, until it finally snapped. I went straight to my friend Margaret's house. She and I had known each other since our 20s, back when our children were small and we thought life was something you could plan perfectly with a notebook and a pen. She opened the door in her robe, hair in curlers, eyes widening when she saw me. "Katherine? My God, what happened?" I didn't give her the whole story on the doorstep. I just said, "Can I stay here tonight?" Her answer was immediate. "Of course." In her kitchen, she made me tea, chamomile, my favorite, and let me speak in my own time. When the words finally came, they came in pieces. The pantry, locked. My chair, moved. She hit me. Margaret's hands tightened around her mug. "Katherine," she said softly, "you've given them enough. It's time to give to yourself." Something in her voice, the certainty, the lack of pity, made me feel less like a victim and more like a woman who had just made a choice. Over the next weeks, I began piecing myself back together. The first step was finding somewhere permanent to live. Margaret offered me her spare room indefinitely, but I didn't want to impose. I wanted my own space, a place where every corner held only my things, my choices, my peace. I found a listing for a small apartment in a senior community on the other side of town. The rent was modest, and the pictures showed a sunny living room with lace curtains and a little balcony. When I went to see it, the manager, a kind man in his 50s named Robert, welcomed me with a smile. The walls were painted a soft cream, the kind that made the light feel warmer. I could imagine my knitting basket in the corner, my books stacked neatly by the armchair. I signed the papers that same day. Moving in was simple. I didn't have much. Just the suitcase, a few boxes Margaret helped me pack, and the handful of things I'd kept from Peter. His old pipe, the watch he wore every day, a framed photo of us on our wedding day. On my first morning there, I opened the curtains and let the sun pour in. I brewed coffee the way Peter liked it, even though I drank it alone. I set the mug on the table and thought, this is mine. All of it. Mine. I started filling my days, not with obligations to others, but with small joys for myself. Morning walks around the neighborhood, where I'd nod to other residents and sometimes join them for a lap or two. The air smelled different there, fresh without the undercurrent of tension I'd grown used to. Knitting in the afternoons, my needles clicking softly as I worked on scarves and blankets to donate to the shelter. And the library. Oh, the library. Volunteering there felt like slipping into a warm bath. I orgatimas. Anized shelves, read stories to children during the weekly reading hour, and lost myself in the quiet hum of pages turning. It was strange, at first, to feel no one watching me, no one sighing when I asked a question, no one criticizing the way I folded a towel or arranged a shelf. At night, the apartment was silent, but it was a good kind of silence. The kind that meant safety. The ache didn't vanish overnight. Some evenings I'd be halfway through a cup of tea when a memory would strike. Lily's giggle, the way David used to call me Mama when he needed comfort, and I'd feel the familiar tug in my chest. But I made a choice not to let those moments pull me back into grief. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I refused to let their cruelty define me. I began writing again, small journal entries about my days, my thoughts, my hopes. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, but slowly, the pages began to fill with something more, proof that I was still here, still living, still choosing. Margaret visited often. Sometimes we'd sit on the balcony with a bottle of wine, talking about everything and nothing. She never pushed me to forgive, never told me it's time to move on. She simply reminded me that healing wasn't a race. One afternoon, as I was leaving the library, a woman stopped me on the steps. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes. "I just wanted to say," she said quietly, "I see you here every week. You always look so peaceful. I hope I'm like that when I'm your age." Her words stayed with me for days. Peace. That's what she saw. And maybe, little by little, that's what I was becoming. There was power in realizing that I didn't need my son's approval to feel whole, that my worth wasn't tied to the role of mother or grandmother in someone else's house. For decades, my life had revolved around caring for others, cooking, cleaning, sacrificing my wants so they could have theirs. Now, for the first time, my life revolved around caring for me. Sometimes in the evenings, I'd step out onto the balcony and watch the sunset. The sky would be painted in streaks of orange and gold, and I'd think about Peter. I'd imagine him there beside me, his hand warm in mine, telling me he was proud, and in those moments, I knew that even though I'd lost the home I thought I had, I'd found something better, a life that was mine. Months later, I got a letter. The handwriting was shaky. David's. The envelope was worn, as if it had been carried around in a pocket for days before he found the courage to send it. My heart tightened the moment I saw my name written in his hand. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one that now held only my teacup and a vase of fresh flowers, and slid a butter knife under the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper. I could tell the pen had pressed hard. The words were engraved on the back of the page. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you. Hannah filed for divorce. She took Lily and left. I don't know where they are. I don't know how to fix what I broke with you." I read those words over and over, the ink blurring as tears welled. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the memory of how small I'd felt that day in their kitchen, standing there with flowers still on my hands and my son looking away. I set the letter down and just stared at it. My tea had gone cold, the past knocking at my door. For weeks after I moved out, I'd replayed that Tuesday over and over, wondering if I could have said something different, done something different to change what happened. That's the trap of the human heart. It wants to rewrite pain into something softer, something survivable. But reading David's words made me realize something. The wound wasn't mine to mend anymore. I had done my part. I had loved him. I had raised him. I had given him a home. And when the moment came for him to protect me, he didn't. That was the truth I'd lived with. And now, even as regret knocked on my door in the form of a letter, I wasn't sure if I was ready to answer. Forgiveness is a slow bloom. I didn't rush to call him, not out of cruelty, not even out of anger, but because forgiveness is not a door you fling open in the heat of emotion. It's a window you decide to unlock when you're truly ready to let the air in. And at that moment, I was still breathing in the peace I'd worked so hard to find. My little apartment had become my sanctuary. Every morning, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains I'd picked out myself. I had a favorite spot by the window where I sipped my coffee and watched the neighborhood wake up. No one here slammed doors. No one raised their voice to make me small. No one measured my worth by how much I cooked, cleaned, or sacrificed. I was learning to belong to myself again, and I wasn't ready to give that up. David's absence and presence. In the weeks that followed, David sent 2 more letters, each one a little longer. He told me about the silence in his house after Hannah left, how he'd walk into the kitchen and half expect to see Lily at the table, swinging her legs and asking for pancakes, how he'd open the fridge and see the milk still full because no one was there to pour a glass for. He wrote about therapy, how his counselor said he had patterns of passivity, a phrase that sounded clinical, but in his case meant he let others decide the temperature of his home, even when it was freezing cold. And then he wrote the words, "I didn't expect." I think I learned it from Dad. You were always the one fighting for us, and I guess I never learned how to fight for you. That one broke something loose inside me, not in a painful way, but in the way spring breaks the frozen ground, slow with the promise of green, choosing peace over bitterness. I didn't write back right away. I let his words sit. I walked in the park. I read novels that made me laugh out loud. I baked cookies and shared them with my neighbors, people who didn't care if I left a little flour on the counter. The more I lived in this new life, the more I understood something. Bitterness is heavy, but so is guilt. And if I ever wanted David and I to meet somewhere in the middle, I had to be strong enough to carry neither. I wasn't there yet, but I was closer than I had been. The unexpected visit. One rainy Thursday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, David stood there, hair damp, eyes tired, holding a small paper bag. "I didn't call," he said. "I was afraid you'd tell me not to come." I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like someone entering a church. From the bag, he pulled out a loaf of banana bread. "I baked this," he said, almost sheepishly. "It's probably terrible." I sat at my kitchen table. We didn't talk about the Tuesday that changed everything, not at first. We talked about the weather, my volunteer work at the library, a stray cat that had started hanging around his porch. And then, over slices of banana bread that were surprisingly good, he said, "I don't expect you to forgive me today. I just want you to know, I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry, I didn't before." A soft opening. We didn't hug when he left, but as he stepped into the rain, I called after him. "David," I said. He turned. "Bring more banana bread next time." He smiled. Not the easy smile of the son I used to know, but a careful, grateful one. The kind you give when someone offers you the smallest key to a door you thought was locked forever. My life now. I'm living a life where no one diminishes me to make themselves feel bigger, where my value isn't tethered to my usefulness. I tend to my little garden on the balcony, growing tomatoes and lavender. I have a standing Friday night card game with neighbors. I've even started painting again, something I hadn't done since before David was born. I've learned that sometimes the family you lose is the peace you gain. And sometimes, if you're lucky, peace will make space for pieces of that family to return. Not to the place they were, but to a new place you can both live with. For now, my door isn't locked, but it's not wide open either. It's simply waiting. Because I know now that love doesn't always look like holding on. Sometimes it looks like standing still and letting someone find their own way back. And if David ever does, truly, fully, Pito, I'll be here. Not the same woman he left behind in that kitchen, but the woman I became after I walked out of it.